Boston's entering into a very unique time when it comes to where we're going to go. And throughout this first year, being the mayor of the city of Boston, you think about, everyone's asking, what's the vision, how are you going to move forward, and a lot of things get thrown at you at a lot of different times. And I spent the first few months going from being a state representative to mayor of Boston, and there's somewhat of a transformation there, and there's a little bit of a learning curve going from a policymaker to an executive. And so that's one of the things that we did. And also, when you sit down and think about Boston, and there's been an awful lot of talk about 21st century Boston, and I started to think back in history about the 20th century. And the 20th century really didn't come into its own until about 1914. And I thought about, Boston really, what I want Boston to be is the first 21st century city. And this is about the time when we start to define that. Because as the turn of the century, we start to talk about really where are we going as a city, where are we going as a country, where are we going as a world in a lot of ways. And we're looking at how do we continue to improve Boston. We look at the different policies. We're using data a lot more. In my office, I have a data dashboard. It wasn't there a year ago. It wasn't there for back to the beginning of Boston. It's there today. Why is it there? Because the key metrics that we're talking about. Some of the questions that are on the wall here about what's going to be asked of me today. When we talk about homelessness, and we talk about housing, we talk about permitting, it's not only easy talking about, and I can give you an answer you might like and say, this is great, I'm glad you're moving forward. We're tracking our progress on the wall, and that's very, very important for us. We talk about development. How are we doing in development? We're tracking it on the wall, meaning I have it in my office saying, okay, this is where we're going, and we're looking, how do we grow as a city? How do we grow as a city, not just with economic development, and not just with housing, but making sure that we are able to have a city that has a middle class and make sure we can, as a city, we can move forward. All the initiatives that we're pushing forth this year is about how do we make ourselves a healthy, innovative city for the 21st century, and how do we continue to grow our city. This building here is unique because when this building was built, or being discussed, no one really knew what was going to happen here. This is probably, in my opinion, one of the most exciting spaces in Boston, because as you leave, a new group comes in today about something completely, totally different. And it's a space that in the Innovation District that truly is what's innovation every day and continually changes. Now, there's a lot of great businesses down here in the Innovation District, and we talk about the innovation, but this space changes because great minds and young minds and old minds and everyone's minds comes together and talks about a whole bunch of different things. So I'm going to stop talking there because I think really there's probably a few questions that people want to ask me. But I want to thank you for being here today. I want to thank you for having these conversations. Because as you notice, when I say my team, there's a lot of people that presented here today, but there's also a lot of people that work in City Hall here today. And you might not think it, but you might say, well, politics isn't for me and no one's going to listen to me. You're talking about ideas today that somebody from my team is here listening to. They will take it back. The urban mechanics are here, and I guarantee you we'll have a conversation back there saying, somebody brought up a discussion around this. Somebody brought up a discussion. Maybe we can attack the homeless issue with this. Maybe we can talk about what's the next future, what's the next innovation in Boston. So thank you for participating here today, and I look forward to getting into a conversation. Well, let me take a question off the board here. What's the city doing about increasing number of homeless people? That's a difficult question. Because as you read in the newspaper over the last couple, actually today in both papers, I believe, and in the State House News Service, they spoke about the growing number of the homeless population in the city of Boston. And when you think about the reasons for it, they gave some reasons for it because of the economy, but also a lot of people come to Boston because of the services that are here. And I've been sitting at a lot of tables because of what happened with Long Island Bridge, where we had to make a decision to close it down, and having a conversation. What Long Island Bridge did, closing down Long Island Bridge for me was a very difficult decision. And we're working on temporary shelters, and we're going to be hopefully be able to talk a little more about that as we move forward very soon. But it also gave me an opportunity to say, okay, how do we deliver services in the city of Boston to homeless people? And how are we in the city of Boston as a shelter looking to end homelessness in the city of Boston? And I was able to bring in providers like Pine Street Inn to sit in our office and say to us, listen, this is what we do. We get people into our shelter, and then we try to help the people in our shelter and try to help them, give them the job skills they need or the workforce training they need or something they need to get them back on their feet and get them into housing. What the city of Boston does is basically we bring people into our shelter to make sure they have a warm place to stay on a particular night, give them something to eat, allow them an opportunity to take a shower, allow them an opportunity to store their belongings, and then they leave the next morning, and then the following night they come back again. And that's what we do in the city of Boston, and there's really no program around that. And what our job now really is now thinking about Long Island Bridge being closed down, I'm looking as an opportunity for us to really have a really good conversation internally to talk about how do we deal with homelessness in the city of Boston. Some of the homelessness is happening is drug addiction, alcoholism. That's an issue of being able to get people into a detox and get them into a detox, get them on a path to recovery. That ends homelessness. We have some cases where there's mental illness, where it's a little bit more difficult, a little more challenging, that we have to figure our way through. And also there's other places as far as resources. You know, people don't want a homeless shelter in their backyard. People don't want housing in their neighborhood. We have to figure ways of creating more housing so people have places to live. The reason why our numbers are growing, I think, in some reasons, is because we have programs here. And I think the fact that the reason why we have increased numbers now, I think people are paying attention to it. I think when Long Island Bridge was there, no one was paying attention to it. All of a sudden, Long Island Bridge closed. Everyone's like, oh my God, we have all these homeless people. They were there the day before the bridge closed. And now it's an opportunity for us to really take a good look at it.
So what infrastructure project or projects can we use to leverage the creation of more green spaces in the city of Boston?
One is Storrow Drive. In Storrow Drive right now, right by Mass Ioneer, there's a real great conversation going on about reconstructing the road around there, building a parking garage underneath so the parking garage could be used for Mass Ioneer and their expansion. In that conversation, they're talking about moving the roadway over to add more land use to the Esplanade, which creates more opportunities, allows us opportunities to come up with a better infrastructure and design for a roadway. Right now you have kind of 4 lanes going everywhere. It would be limit us down to 2 or 3 lanes, so we'd be able to do better infrastructure, and that's one program that we're looking at doing. That's on the right on the front line here. Another one is that we're looking in the city of Boston, and we're beginning the conversation. We haven't done it yet, of a master transportation plan around the city of Boston. And I think when we look at those plans, it's not just about green space. It's also about creating proper bike lanes, proper bicycle tracks, proper pedestrian crossings, proper signalization. I think that those conversations have to happen in the city of Boston and beyond, in the region as well, and we're looking regionally. But those are conversations, and I didn't talk about it here, somebody might have mentioned it earlier, our housing plan to increase housing by 53,000 units by the year 2030 will add to the population to about 700,000 people, which means that more people, there's more people need to get around. In order for them to get around, we have to look at our infrastructure to see, is there an opportunity for us, and what's that infrastructure going to be? Part of it's going to be roads, because people drive. Part of it's going to be bicycles, because people ride bikes, and that number's increasing every day. Some of it's going to be walking. You know, we're not really a walking city. People go to New York and they walk 50 blocks to just tour around. We don't do that here. We think it's like miles away, and it's really a smaller city than Manhattan. And then also public transportation. So I think there's an opportunity as we talk about what's the transportation system going to look like in the future, we start to build into those other things, more green space, if we can, bikes, people, cars, public transportation. That's how we do it. Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming today. I think throughout the course of the conference, we really discussed how so many social policy problems are interrelated, but there's huge issues of capacity. So for you, what do you think is the most important social policy problem that you would like to focus on?
There's not one. You can't focus on one without looking at them all. It's difficult. And in the role, you know, when I talk about, when I think about my role as mayor of the city of Boston, it's a little different than a policymaker. And what I'd like to do is do some social policy issues on the city level that the state can model after me. You know, being a legislator, you know, the state took a good look at, I'll give you one example, homelessness. A couple of years ago, they had a committee to end homelessness. I was a representative at the time, so I'm going back to that time. I don't think that issue was addressed properly. We address families a little bit more in that. One of the ways we address families is by allowing families to be put in motels, which became a problem in itself. We got people off the street, but put them in motels. It created more problems. We really didn't deal with individual single homelessness in the city of Boston. That number went up, in the state it went up. So I think we have to look at our social policy as a whole around the Commonwealth and address this. This isn't just a Boston problem. It's also a Worcester problem, Quincy problem, Springfield problem, Pittsfield problem, and it's a regional problem. So we have to look at how do we deal with it on a state level. I'm not passing the buck. What I'm saying is the city is going to look at a lot of these policies. We're going to deal with a lot of them, but I think the state has to really help us here with some of this stuff.
Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, you have a lot of university researchers here from many of the universities here in Boston, and I'm sure there are all kinds of ways we're going to be able to help your administration. But I wonder if you could say a little bit more about what role you think the universities in and around Boston should be playing beyond the research we can help you with.
Yeah, I'll tell you, first of all, how important I think the universities are. As I was putting my cabinet together, we started talking, we had Joyce Lenahan, Chief of Policy, John Barrows, Chief of Economic Development. I'm sure there was some, Yasha Franklin Hodges here as well. So we started thinking about education. And in the city of Boston, we were saying, okay, as mayor of the city of Boston, my role and responsibility is really the Boston Public Schools. But in Boston, we have charter schools, which the kids that go to charter schools live in the city of Boston. Their families I represent their families. We have young people and people that go to school in Boston also that go to private schools, and I represent them as well. So we started to think a little differently. What can we do that really creates something here in the City Hall that makes a connection to the mayor's office and the cabinet? And the idea came out of Chief of Education. And it's Ron Dorsey. I don't know if Ron was here today at all just talking, but Ron Dorsey is the Chief of Education. So under his kind of umbrella is the Boston Public School System. He doesn't oversee them, but it's part of his cabinet. Charter schools, private schools, college universities, allowing college universities to have that conduit to the mayor's office. And I think that in the past, the relationship has been around economic development, maybe the BRA, any different colleges, you'd have a relationship with the BRA because you want a master plan or build a dorm or build a building. That's your connection to city government. Today, the connection to city government is through the Chief of Education. So what the role, I think, and the reason why it's there, I think the role of college universities in this city are very, very important. I don't think, two things, I don't think people understand the relationship already of the universities and the colleges with our system here. I don't think that story is being told. And I think there's an opportunity right now to capitalize more on those relationships, whether it's a conversation like this, or whether it's a mentoring program, or whether it's a job program, or whatever the issue might be. So I think it's very, very important, particularly when you have the greatest, arguably the greatest college universities in the world right here in the city of Boston. Yeah.
Hi, Marty. Bill Gormley from Economy and from the Ben Franklin Institute. Thanks again for being our graduation speaker. It was a terrific day for the students. In thinking further on Barry's question, pushing it out to think about community colleges and universities, Yasha and John both referred to your goal of reducing by 50% the number of to increase by 50% the number of on-campus housing?
Actually, 16,000 beds by the year 2030.
Okay. 16,000
additional beds on campus. And in our housing plan, there's 4 components of the housing plan, and I'll just quickly go through them, and you probably know it already, some of you are already talking about it. But when we talk about housing in Boston, one of the first things that people complain about, and a lot of heads are going to nod in a minute, is workforce housing. Young people that live in the city, that go to college, come here, they can't stay here because they can't afford. You can live here if there's 3 or 4 of you in an apartment, and then when you want to go on your own, you can't afford it. So in that plan, and I think there's a question up here similar to it, we're looking at workforce housing. People earn between roughly $50,000, maybe a little less, and $150,000 in that area. You're not ready to buy a house yet, and you really want to stay in the city. Our plan is built to help create that type of housing. The second piece of housing is with the federal government funds drying up and less money going into housing, we are going to have an affordable housing problem down the road if we don't continue to build affordable housing. So part of our plan is continuing to build affordable housing in the city of Boston and continuing that creation. Don't say we have enough now, we're going to go middle class. We got to continue to create supportive housing for families that need it. Another piece of that housing is a third of our population is going to, in the next 10 years, going to be 65 and older. And we need to make sure that we have housing and good housing stock for those folks as well. So we're looking at how do we create senior elderly housing in the city of Boston. For-profit senior elderly housing. It's starting to become a trend. What happens there is when seniors want to live in an environment with other seniors, they eventually will sell their home, and their home goes back on the market for other families, but it gives them the opportunity to live in a safe environment where it's somewhat, I don't want to say protected, but there's a potentially to have some supports around those housings. And the last piece is around college universities, asking college universities to build 16,000 beds on campus or off-campus dormitory-style bedrooms. What that will do, if that goal is accomplished, and a lot of colleges and universities want to do it, will free up about 5,300 housing units in the city of Boston that young people are renting now off-campus in areas like Austin, Brighton, Dorchester, Mission Hill, and other parts of the city. So those 4 components really creates, not only does it create new housing stock, it also frees up housing stock in the neighborhood. So we're able to get to our number where we want to get to. Down the back, a couple questions.
About, sorry, thank you. about the creation of the diversity chief,
Yeah.
and what your thoughts are around that, and the outcome or impact of that.
Oh yeah, we're really excited about that. That is an issue that was discussed an awful. When I say an issue, the issue of diversity was discussed an awful lot during the campaign for mayor. In the fact that Boston is 52-54% people of color, and the city leadership and the city hall didn't reflect that. In the case of the police department, leadership of the police department didn't reflect that. In the business community, doesn't reflect that. On boards and commissions in the city, doesn't reflect that. So it's an issue of how do we have 54% people of color that live in the city of Boston, yet it doesn't reflect that in the workforce. So we started talking about how do we do a better job inside City Hall, and how do we create an opportunity for us to really make our mark. So we hired a gentleman by the name of Sean Blue. I don't know if Sean was here today. Sean Blue, who is the Chief Diversity Officer in the City of Boston, comes from New York City, did this for companies. This was his job, diversifying workforces. Teamed him up with Frida Bransfield, who is a City of Boston, lifelong City of Boston, Roxbury, Mattapan resident, who worked her way through City Hall. An opportunity for them to really create some real changes in city government, looking at the workforce that we have, working on recruiting people to come work for the City of Boston, looking at our boards and commissions in the City of Boston, and also so that we, as mayor, go out and talk to people and say, put challenge out to the business community. I have to make sure our own house is in order first. I don't want to say to somebody, well, you have to do this. Well, what about you? Your numbers aren't there yet. So that's kind of where we're going with the Chief Diversity Officer, one of the roles of the team. And I think that's important. We've done some of it already, though. When you look at what we've done with the police department, 50% of the deputies in the police department, of the command staff, are people of color and women. People of color, and then I don't have all the breakdown of the number, but 50% of people of color, and then I think we have 3 or 4 women as well out of the 12, and so we're heading that way. My cabinet, I think we're at almost 40% people of color in the cabinet. So we're working towards making sure that when we talk about diversity in city government, it's not just diversity where I can say, oh, I have 50% people of color in my cabinet, and the workforce doesn't reflect that. We have to make sure it goes from the top to the bottom, or from the bottom to the top, however you want to call it. So that's where we're headed with that initiative. Excited about it. Yeah, Jason's coming with the microphone.
Janice Griffith, Suffolk University Law School.
Oh, yeah.
You mentioned the connection between providing housing and transportation, and you have to look at land use, transportation, in order to accomplish your housing goals. Mm-hmm. Transportation is basically done on a regional basis. And Boston is somewhat hampered. We have sort of fragmented local governments here, a lot of different local governments in our metropolitan region. What kind of regional initiatives do you think are necessary in order to accomplish some of the goals that you've set out? And how would you go about creating these regional initiatives?
Great question. From day one, we started to talk about regionalization when it comes to economic development in the city of Boston. When I say that, I've been partnering with Cambridge and Somerville, with Quincy and Braintree on the Red Line Corridor, the Life Science Corridor, we're calling it. We've been talking with the Metro Mayor's Council of the 13 or so mayors around the city of Boston about supporting each other on infrastructure projects. For example, the Green Line money that just came down, $400 million, none of it comes to Boston. It all goes to Medford, Malden, all the different areas. I am 100% supportive of that. I'm 100% supportive of them getting the money. If they want me to advocate for them at the State House, I will. If they want me to go to Washington, when I go to Washington, advocate for them, I absolutely will. Because none of that money is going to be spent in the city of Boston. But what it does, it connects the Green Line to the city of Boston. So the people that are going to be on the trains coming into work in Boston, or the people going back, living home, however it works, or people from Boston going to work in those cities and towns, it's important for us to support, whether it's transportation, infrastructure, economic development, and eventually we have to get around to the conversation around housing as well, around regionalization. If we want to bring an industry to this region, we need to do it regionally. It can't just be Boston. It can't just be Somerville or Cambridge. If we're competing with San Francisco, we're competing with New York, competing with all these other venues for jobs in different industries, we're taking a regional approach. It'll benefit Boston. People said to me in the very beginning, well, you're the mayor of Boston, you're not the mayor of Cambridge. I know I'm not the mayor of Cambridge. But if we create a new industry to come into this region, Boston's going to get its fair share. Yes?
You took the step of consolidating management over your human services and your public health department with a sort of senior leader. Is there what's your vision for that expanded leadership, and is there an opportunity for those people to be working with a huge investment in Boston citizens made by the state's EOHHS agencies?
Well, you're talking about Felix Arroyo, Health and Human Services? Yeah. There definitely is an opportunity to work together. I mean, I think that there certainly is an opportunity to work with up at the state level. The new governor, incoming governor, he was in with the cabinet meeting the other day in my cabinet, and he had a chance to ask different questions of different cabinet members that were in there, and they got into little specifics about what we're working on with the state. You know, it really is the chief, Felix Arroyo, responsibility is to make sure that the cabinet, the departments that are under him have the supports they need and to stay connected to them. Some of those intertwine, some of those crossover agencies. Our Public Health Commission, as a lot of people know, Barbara Ferrer left and she went to work for a foundation. So we're in the process now of we're doing a national search for a new director of public health. And our public health department really crosses a lot of lines with Health and Human Services on the state level. But some of our other departments, like Elderly Commission, falls under Felix Arroyo's camp here, and over in the state, it falls under a different area. So some of it crosses over, some of it doesn't cross over, but the cabinet really, we advocate for all the different programs. When it comes to the state, we advocate, everyone's kind of advocating for more money to the city of Boston. I don't know if that answers your question. Well, there is. There is, and there's also crossover. I mean, when you talk about somebody with substance abuse, I mean, it falls under public health. If you're in the school department and you understand that you have a child and their parents might have a substance abuse problem, well, it's over in the school department. So there's a connection. We're working on how do we make better connections across agency lines. So, for example, we're working on the Office of Recovery Services, which is going to fall under public health. But that office will be able to cross over lines, go into education, go into economic development, wherever it might be. There has to be that constant conversation. It doesn't fall the same way the state does. It kind of is a little more across lines. It's, for example, the veteran services. Part of veteran services is homelessness. That falls under Department of Neighborhood Development, arguably. Part of that is substance and alcohol abuse or PTSD, post-traumatic stress. That falls under public health. You have senior citizens that, under the Elderly Commission, that might have problems with transportation. That falls under transportation. So it crosses over. You can't put it the same on the state as you are the city. We're a lot more closer to the people. So a lot of the people in the different department, the different groups of people we're working with in the city cross over a whole bunch of different departments. And that's why what I've tried to do is consolidate some of our departments so we don't have 64 different departments. We have less departments doing better work. Or fewer departments doing better work, maybe.
Mr. Mayor, Tom Palmer.
Oh, Tom.
Would you say a word like you did in your Labor Day speech about the role of labor in creating more housing and more affordable housing, please?
No, I think labor has a big role at the table here. I mean, I think that first of all, there's an ability. One of the questions I'm trying to think. One of the questions is how do you, rather than giving tax incentives to create more housing, I forget where it is. Oh, can you please find an incentive other than tax breaks to entice companies and/or affordable housing developments to come to Boston? One way is by using labor's ability to have pots of money because of their investments and say, listen, we have pots of money here. And using labor's ability to invest, and labor wants to invest, they're investing in housing and infrastructure all across the country right now. Some of the pension funds and health and welfare funds. So that's one way of bringing in labor into the conversation. I think also when it comes to construction in Boston, a lot of the labor unions are looking, okay, is there a way we can do something with our rate to entice more development as well? And I think that's an important piece as well. We're having that conversation with labor as well. Also, having labor go to developers and contractors and say, we want you in this market. Because the housing market is not something that a lot of people are jumping into if the profit margin isn't as great as they want it to be. For example, around the housing that's going on around here now, when I say around here, the Seaport, the rate on return is a big investment. I mean, you're getting a good return on these condos because they're going for big money, or these townhouses. When you talk about workforce housing, the return on investment wasn't always there, the 6 or 7 or 8% that people wanted. So I think that labor can entice from bringing people to the table in that case.
This will be the last one.
And let me just say one other thing. the folks we're building the house for are people that work in labor. That's the middle class. People who earn between, $45,000 and $100,000 a year. That's the group of people we're trying to target. So I think that's another way of keeping that middle class here. One last question? Well, two last questions. We'll do two last questions.
All right, I'll be quick. You outlined housing affordability as being key to the future of Boston, and with that, put forward an ambitious plan for 53,000 new units. How does your administration plan to approach the political puzzle of this ambitious citywide goal, coupled with potential community pushback, say, to increase density and neighborhood change? In other words, where
I know what you're asking.
Yeah.
Well, in the Chamber of Commerce breakfast I had the other day, I actually talked about two growth zones in two of those areas in Boston. One is on the Red Line between Andrews Station and Broadway Station on Dorchester Avenue. There's some businesses there now, and there's an opportunity for us to look at. It might not, the construction might not happen today, but over the course of the next 10, 15 years, look at zoning that, to change the zoning so when people come in now, and one of the ways of saving money is that somebody's going to come in and look at a piece of property and say, well, what can I put there? Well, it's already zoned for 300 units of housing. That just saves a lot of headaches, and people say, I'm ready to go in and buy. That saves money. Over the long term, that saves money because it's already pre-zoned. And the second growth zone is in Forest Hills and Jamaica Plain, going from Washington Street to Eggleston Square. Those two areas are important for us for a couple of reasons. One is because there's an opportunity for us to grow there. And the second, there's an opportunity to have a real robust community process to allow people saying that this is okay. Don't worry about it. Don't freak out that your neighborhood's changing, because in a lot of cases, neighborhoods are changing anyway, but they're not going to change that drastically. This is an opportunity for us to be able to build density on a not a boulevard, but on an avenue with train stations between them. And I think what's happening in a lot of neighborhoods is that, for example, it's different than what happened in South Boston, where people were buying, flipping condos and 3-family houses, paying insane amounts of money for a condo on the second floor of a 3-family. I grew up in a 3-family. I still don't understand it today, because what happened on the second and third floor, we knew on the first floor, and what happened on the first floor. And then you have people, what happens when the market gets hot, people take a lot of land that might be 4,800 feet and say, okay, I want to put 8 condominiums on there, and over the years have been approved for 6. It's just changed the whole concept. This type of idea is a little different because you're talking pre-zoning and it's big, but it also allows you to keep people in the city.
Thank you, Mayor. I hope this is a good question to end on. I'm Catherine Lusk from the Boston University Initiative on Cities. And in our discussion today of policy research partnerships, I'm curious if you think that cities should have not just policy priorities, but research agendas, or if that should live at the city level as a master agenda, or at the cabinet level by a cabinet seat, or should it remain as it does today within individual departments?
No, I think that's it's a lot in that question. Let me just tell you what we're doing in the city of Boston. We're looking at what type of city do we want to have by 2030. So we're preparing for 2030, meaning when we talk about infrastructure, housing, all those different initiatives. Part of that is, as we talk about policy, it's like the transportation question. We probably have in the city of Boston, realistically, $10, $12 billion worth of infrastructure improvements that we have to truly have the infrastructure that we want. Well, we have to set the policy for that now. We have to set the groundwork for that now to get where we want to get to by 2030. And I think that can be said for any level of city government. And I think it's important for that conversation to have. You mentioned a couple of different places. I think it's important to have the conversation all the different places. A few months ago, I brought in, I was down in New York City. I got a chance to tour Brooklyn. Pretty impressed with it. Love what they were doing there. I said, we got to do that here. Brought in the planners. I brought in some of the planners from the BRA, and I brought in the directors. And I said, I want the planners in the BRA to start thinking outside the box. What do you mean? I said, I want all the planners to start thinking, what do they vision Boston as? What do they vision their areas they're covering as? That's never been done before. It's always been given to them. This is what you're doing. This is how we want to do it, and this is how we're going to build it. I want the planners to start coming back to me and saying, this is what I would think Eggleston Square should look like, or this is what I think Dorchester Avenue should look like, or this is what I think that Dudley Square should look like, rather than coming from the mayor's office and a couple of developers and this is what it's going to look like. I think we got to get more out of people and more ideas out of people. Just like you're having conversations here today. If this conversation was run by Barry only and Barry told you what was right and no one else had a conversation, it's not a conversation. So for me as mayor, if I'm telling Brian Golden, and Brian Golding's telling his staff, this is how it happens to be, that's not growth in the city. And that's not how I operate, and that's not how the city of Boston is going to operate. And I think that having those conversations is okay. And I think the different ideas have to be from the whole, throughout the whole organization. Thank you very much. Thanks, Ed. Everybody.